let's talk a couple details about Hamas, specifically how Israel has historically funded and supported its growth. First, we should make it clear that not everything Hamas does is simply funded by Israel. They are also acting out of anger that has built up over 75 years of brutalization and oppression. The larger force behind all of this is apartheid, is the unjust state of Israel. But anyway, into the details. Netanyahu has been very, very upfront about allowing funds to be transferred to Hamas in recent years, specifically to keep the Palestinian people divided and powerless. From what I can tell, these funds do not come out, like Israel is not just giving them money. The funds come from places like Qatar. But in order for Qatar to give Hamas money, Israel has to approve it. And they do, which is odd because Israel is also very open about calling Hamas terrorists. Usually, when you are considering a group to be a terrorist group, you freeze their assets. That would be the normal thing to do. But no, Netanyahu approves it. A right-wing politician, Avigdor Lieberman, has criticized this, saying that this is Israel funding terrorism against itself. So there are other Israeli politicians who are open with asking, like, why are we doing this? Netanyahu says, whoever is against a Palestinian state should be for transferring the funds to Hamas, because maintaining a separation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza helps prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, you might say, understandably, Hamas controls Gaza. So, isn't that just something that humanitarian that they are doing so that food and medical supplies and stuff can get to Gaza? To which I say a much easier way of doing that would be just giving them their human rights in the first place. The roots of Hamas itself goes way back. Israel sidestepping and even supporting its growth goes back to around the 1970s, when they were trying to defeat the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO. That's who Israel saw as their main enemy at the time. Unlike Hamas, PLO was secular and very, very left-wing. They did engage in direct action, responding to the extremely violent oppression that they were experiencing. And I'm not here to say everything they did was good and amazing. I'm not super familiar with the history. The point is, they were also sort of Marxist. And especially in the time of the Cold War, Western powers were like, whoa, big, scary. And they were the main opposition. They were the main, threat against Israel losing its power. So Israel wanted to do anything it could to stop the PLO. And so they see that there was a growing enemy against them, which was the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza, which was led by Sheikh Yassin. Yassin created and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing things, Yassin created what was the precursor to Hamas, which was called Mujama. And Israel recognized Mujama as a charity and later an organization. Yassin did launch various schools and services for Gazans. So that's why Israel saw it as a charity. And Israeli officials claimed that he was 100% peaceful. But even in the 70s, he was reprinting the writings of Sayyid Qutb, who was advocating for global jihad. Not something that the Israeli government would really want, right? Retired Israeli official Avner Cohen says that traditional Islamic clerics kept telling them to stay away from Yassin. He is a big danger. You're going to have big regrets if you keep doing this. They also noted that he did not have formal Islamic training and that they worried what his ends were. But Israeli officials still claimed that he was 100% peaceful. But at the same time, in the early 80s, there were confrontations between the PLO and Mujama that were quite violent. This escalated a lot in the early 80s. One former general in the IDF said that he received a call from Israeli soldiers saying that there were armed Islamic activists that wanted to go through the checkpoint and join a battle at a university. And he told them, if they want to burn each other, let them go. So, two things that I want to highlight here. This is why I'm telling this story. One is that Israel very clearly knew that Mujama, which became Hamas, was violent, and they continued to sidestep around them, let it grow, and even transfer funds to them. The second thing is I just want to highlight what they were doing here and how deeply, deeply evil it is. To specifically allow for the growth of a group that is more hateful and more violent so that more Palestinians would be harmed, so that there was less Palestinian resistance that could overcome Israel, so that they could divide Palestinian communities. By the way, again, if you think Hamas is the only main front of Palestinian liberation, you are very, very wrong. There have been many different organizations, many different tactics. It's important to understand that non-violent organizations have also been met with extreme violence from IDF forces. So, we can condemn Hamas all we want, but this is the natural outcome when the IDF suppresses and eliminates all of the nonviolent resistance that has also happened. Not completely eliminates. There are still people who are using nonviolent tactics, but you know what I mean. In 1984, they captured Sheikh Yassin, and when they found a cache of his weapons, he told them he was going to use them on Palestinians. So what did they do? They let him go. Hamas released its famous charter in 1987, calling for a lot of things. It does have explicitly anti-Jewish sentiment in it. Anti-Semitism that is very, very distinct from European anti-Semitism, for example, because, what happens when almost all, if not all of the Jews that you know are people that are keeping you in a cage, etc. It's very different. But the point is, it does have violence in it. It does have anti-Jewish language in it. And Israel continued to let Hamas grow. Israeli officials continued to maintain contacts with Hamas and claim that they were unaware of this charter, which, if you have contacts with them, how is that possibly true? But okay. There's so much more that we could get into. But again, why does this matter? Since last week, since the beginning of last week, the first images that we came across were of Israelis dying. There were innocent children, elderly, disabled people who were killed or taken captive by Hamas. Of course, there are also many stories that were told that did not turn out to be true. But in any case, those images and those stories are being used by the Israeli government to justify genocide, to justify war crimes. And again, you have to remember that Egyptian officials, who quite often will moderate discussions between Hamas and the Israeli government, warned them repeatedly that this was coming, and Netanyahu ignored it. Apparently, there were also loud exercises that Hamas was doing near the border. It would have been very, very hard to miss. There are Israeli citizens themselves who are demanding accountability from the government because they're like, you knew that this was coming and you didn't do anything. To be clear, a lot of the people that are criticizing the government for this are to the right. They are often Zionists who are saying, oh, you just should have had better security. But I would say they didn't care for your livelihood from the get-go. They have used Jewish death as a pawn for decades to their own violent ends to justify horrible things. I want to put this out there all just to say that it is okay to recognize that there are things that happen to innocent people by Hamas that were horrible and wrong, and that it is completely the Israeli government's fault on multiple levels, and that the fallout for Gazans is already so much worse.